Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery, and it's brought to you by our friends at knowyourscript.org. Go check them out. Without them, we couldn't do this podcast. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist. And before we start the show, we always look at each other like, did you bring something to start? And I was like, I don't know. Did you? And you said, I kind of got something. And I said, what was it? And you said, it's about cannabis and psychedelics, and I just don't know. And then our guest was like, everybody's talking about that. So let's talk about it a little bit.
Well, I being a professor, I get stuff comes across my email, like, alerts for the latest research and things. And lately there have been several different research articles, which I haven't taken a deep dive into, but something that I think we in the business have known for a long time that is starting to become more accepted by the general public, and that is that some people have an intolerance to cannabis and the high levels of THC, which are becoming higher as people vape instead of smoke. And that is causing psychosis, very similar to schizophrenia. So a lot of people can be misdiagnosed. Instead of the technical diagnosis would be psychosis-induced cannabis use disorder. So the psychosis is just like schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is probably one of the more destructive and for the public kind of scary types of mental health disorders, and it just means that a person struggles with hallucinations and delusions. They have a hard time not being able to or being able to function normally, hearing voices, seeing things that aren't really there, and those same symptoms can be a result of cannabis use. So one of the things that's been sort of discouraging to me as somebody who works with a lot of adolescents here in Salt Lake is that in the last 18 years that I've been here doing this, of course, the ideas around marijuana have changed a lot to the point where I know that a lot of teachers, even in our public schools, are saying, "Oh, marijuana is good. It helps you in a lot of different ways." And as we're seeing it become more legal in different states and more research being done on, we are finding that there may be some pain management benefits and a few other things. But for the most part, people still don't. They need to embrace the idea that it really is dangerous. And
it's a drug.
It's a drug, and none of us really know how we're going to react to things that we put into our bodies. We've had how many examples on our show of people who, took a lot of heavy drugs and it didn't do much, yet then they did one thing and then that was their DOC forever. And we just don't know how we're going to react. Yours was Bud Light. Some other kid out there right now is going to be trying marijuana for the first time this weekend, and that might be something his brain can't tolerate.
Let's dissect the cannabis topic for just a little bit, because, 20 years ago in college, this was prevalent all over the campus. Don't panic, man. It's organic. You know what I mean? They would say
if
that.
It rhymes, yeah.
But they would say that all the time.
Sure.
God gave it to us, man. This is all right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you'd walk around and people would be throwing the Frisbee and playing SEPA or hacky, and they'd be like, one day weed's going to be legal for everyone, man. It's going to be the best thing ever. And I'm like, it's never going to be legal. And here it is legal. And I think the people are kind of trying to figure it out, what it really is all about. And we've had people on here that say marijuana is a gateway drug. We've had people on here say, no, it's not a gateway drug. You don't know that. I think the conversation needs to be had with our youth. And the tolerance is going up, the THC. Back 20 years ago, you weren't having this high potency of marijuana.
Well, just like any organic material, you can breed it for certain qualities. You can have different colored strawberries. If you go down to the orchard, you can see that's what they can breed that, or watermelons that have a certain color inside that they don't normally have. And you can do that with THC levels in marijuana. And, of course, that's what's happened over the last 50 years is people have become expert at breeding different strains of marijuana.
I think there's an indica, and then there's a sativa. They're the two different kinds that people do. And then they can crossbreed.
And then there are variations of that. But
I'll tell you
the thing that I'm most concerned about are the pens. And so just like you have people who are smoking a cigarette versus vaping nicotine, you can have much higher levels of nicotine in what they're vaping. Same thing with THC in marijuana. And so kids are being misled to believe that marijuana is not harmful in any way. And the research that's coming out on marijuana is saying that's actually not true.
Let's talk about this because early on in this podcast, you talked about why the drinking age was 21 and it should be more like 23, 25. And you said the reason why is because we weren't developed enough up in our brain and in the mental health. Is that still correct?
So the reason I would push that number back farther is we now know that you have cognitive neurodevelopment through your mid-20s. Mm-hmm. And so we know alcohol kills brain cells. So we're working against our own neurodevelopment when you start using drugs and alcohol at a young age.
And so our youth, who somehow now weed is getting a pass or more socially acceptable, probably more accessible than it's ever been.
I can tell you right now, a teenager in Salt Lake City, it's much easier for them to get marijuana than alcohol.
Really?
Absolutely. They can just walk down to a variety of parks and public places and at school, and they can get it. And alcohol, because it's controlled, is harder for them to get. They either have to have someone buy it for them or swipe it from their parents' liquor cabinet or something like that. It's a little bit harder to get your hands on.
And now it's coming in all kinds of different varieties. Have you ever been to a weed store?
No.
I've been to a weed store.
Okay.
And you go in there and you can get cookies, you can get drinks,
all the different edibles,
you can get lotion, you can get gummies, you can get gum, you can get drops, you can get it in all these different ways.
Right.
Now, back 20 years ago when I was in college, it was easy to find out who were the weed smokers were because there was a puff of cloud and they always smelled like it.
I think it was more like 25, 30 years ago.
Okay, well, if you want to age me, I'm not the one wearing a cardigan.
I love my cardigan, man.
You know what I mean? But I mean, now it is easily hideable.
Yeah, for sure. You don't have to smoke it. You don't have to light anything up. And in fact, different states have different rules. My understanding is that for medical marijuana in the state of Utah, you can't put flame to flower. You can't light it that way. But you have, like you just said, dozens of other options for how to take in the THC.
All right, now before we get to our guest, I want to talk about something that seems to be rampant all over the addiction websites and people talking about this California sober. Have you heard about California sober?
I have not. Tell me about it.
So California sober means you're not doing the hard drugs. You're just drinking and smoking a little marijuana. And so you're abstaining from all the really reckless stuff. I'm doing the air quotes here, but you're just California sober.
Is that what they call it?
And so Miley Cyrus, and I think there was another pop star that said she was California sober. Now she just came out and said, "Hey, look, I'm not California sober anymore," because that was ruining my life as well.
Yeah.
But but people negotiate their sobriety until you figure out, hey.
And that's a common theme in almost all of our guest stories is negotiating your sobriety, basically lying to yourself using different defense mechanisms to justify your behavior. And that's what your brain does to you. You're working against those aspects of your brain when you're trying to get sober because your brain doesn't want to let go of the substance. So sure, it sort of makes some weird rational sense. Oh, if I'm not going to do, heroin or cocaine, but I'll just drink spritzers and smoke a little weed. And it's like, well, on the continuum, yeah, but we know plenty of people, yourself included, where Bud Lights ruined their life.
I was 2 days into rehab, got phone passes, called my mom. I said, "Mom." She goes, "Yes, son." I go, "I'm in the wrong place." She goes, "Why?" I said, "There's people in here for heroin and meth and Adderall. I'm in here for Bud Light. I don't think I'm in the right place." You know what my mom said? "Shut the F up. You're in the right place."
Yep. Love your mom, man.
Yeah. She didn't spare any words. She was like, "Nope, you're definitely in the right place."
Right.
And she was right.
And addiction is addiction. And you can have a severe addiction to something like a street drug like heroin. Mm-hmm. And of course, we know that wrecks your life. But I think if you look at the numbers, more people's lives are ruined by alcohol than they are by heroin. More people use alcohol and become alcoholics than heroin addicts.
Because it's socially acceptable to some degree.
And this California sober is a justification, right? It's just justifying your use of drinking because somehow adding sober to the end softens it up.
But it doesn't.
It doesn't.
Hey, we're glad you stopped by to listen to the show today. We've got a wonderful guest for you. Her name is Debbie Nelson. She's with Maple Mountain Mental Health and Wellness. She's got a story to tell, but she's also doing some amazing things with amino acids and neuroscience when it comes to recovery. Stick around. You're listening to Project Recovery right here on KSL. Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist, and our guest today is Debbie Nelson. She's with Maple Mountain Mental Health and Wellness. We're going to find out more about that at the end of the program. But before we get to that, Debbie, you got a story to share.
Yeah, I've got a story to share. I probably am like a lot of middle-aged women that like drop off, and I call myself, I was kind of like an alcoholic prodigy.
What does that mean?
Well, I really experienced severe trauma in my life, and at 38 years old, someone had said I started just not sleeping. I didn't sleep. And I owned a store, and I worked all the time. They said, well, have you ever tried wine? Let's have a glass of wine. So it seemed like a very sophisticated thing to do. So that glass of wine turned into a box of wine, turned into vodka.
Wow.
Yeah.
So before we get into how a glass turned into a box, into a bottle of vodka, you said it started with some trauma. Is this trauma when you were a little girl, or was this just trauma throughout your life was just kind of a building trauma? It
was building. And I think it was like I had something that was extremely traumatic that had happened, and I was dealing with a business that wasn't quite doing well. I had 5 children. I went through divorce. There was just a lot of things that all of a sudden surfaced, and I went in. I'm a very ADD sort of person. Someone said, try this Adderall, and that was wonderful. That worked just wonderful for me. It gave me what I needed.
So did you start the Adderall before?
Yeah.
The wine?
Yeah, and then it was a combination, because there's no way you can be taking an amphetamine and not have that affect your sleep patterns and such.
Wait, now I got to stop you, because Dr. Matt, I think this is the first time on this podcast where somebody has said they take Adderall and then said it's an amphetamine. And
it is.
It is.
But I a lot of times I don't think people associate it with like that. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. People may not know. I mean, you just go by the trade name, and a lot of us are very just kind of, okay, doc, whatever the doc says. In the prescription, but it's an amphetamine, and that's why it's abusable. That's why it's highly controlled. A lot of psychiatric medicines are not, like Prozac you can't really abuse Prozac. You take too much, it's not good for you, but it's not a recreational drug. But something like Adderall, it can be if you take it the wrong way. I would say that it doesn't have to, if it's prescribed properly and taken properly, it doesn't have to interrupt your sleep patterns because of the short half-life of those sorts of medicines that fall in that family. If there is usually taken in the morning, if you're taking the right dose that's for your body size and type and all of that, everybody's a little different. But for the most part, by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the major effects have worn off. And that's actually why some kids who need it during school, they come home and they struggle doing their homework because they might need a little booster dose. However, most adults who are just told by a friend, hey, why don't you try this Adderall, are not taking it appropriately. They're not being evaluated. They don't have the right dose. And like we've known, they're taking it. Sometimes people crush and snort it, or they double, triple, quadruple a normal dose. And just like any amphetamine, it can be very dangerous for your cardiovascular health. Certainly, it's going to mess with your ability to sleep well and rest. So it's one of those drugs that, when it's used appropriately, can be very, very helpful. I've seen it just absolutely help people. And then, unfortunately, I see a lot of abuse of Adderall and the drugs that fall in that family.
Now, I want to stop you real quick because, I'm naive on a lot of things. But what is an amphetamine?
The easiest way to put it is it's a stimulant drug. So there are a lot of stimulant drugs. Caffeine is a stimulant drug. Amphetamines or methamphetamines are stimulants. Cocaine's a stimulant. So they stimulate synaptic activity at the very smallest levels of your brain. And you kind of feel energy, you feel focus. If you are struggling developing that normally in your brain, if you really have a neurodevelopmental problem like ADHD, then it should bring you kind of up to normal. Baseline, where you're kind of on a level playing field with everyone else. And the person, him or herself, will often experience that as like, wow, this is amazing. I can actually sit down and focus. And you're like, yeah, that's what a regular brain does, and you've just been struggling with a brain disorder.
So did you find that on you,
That
Debbie?
was tremendous for me. So when I first took it, this is how much I didn't know about Adderall. is I took it and I went back and the doctor said, well, how was it? And I said, well, it really made me tired. So it's a very high-powered amphetamine, actually. So that's a sign truly of someone who does have that disorder, because it actually did slow my very overactive brain, and I was able to focus. Now, what happens, and what I learned later on that I'll get to, is that dependency is because we keep developing more neurotransmitters, and so that's why the need for a higher dose keeps on going up. That window of effectiveness narrows and narrows. So it was very effective. And again, like I said, as prescribed. So that was my start of it. And it is very frequently that it's counteracted with sleep problems that people will have, children will have. And, at the beginning, I didn't abuse it. I didn't have any abuse.
Took as directed.
Took it as directed. And then, but I had sleep problems. So then, which is, again, is a very common thing with trauma and things going on. You're depleting what you have going on.
I talked to you on the way in, and we were talking about that. And Dr. Matt, I've said this on the podcast before, to help me get to sleep at night when I was really hard in my active addiction, even before that, it was 2 beers always did the job. 2 beers would quiet my brain. Yeah. 2 beers would get me not thinking about what I needed to do and what I had done.
Bring the anxiety down.
It would just kind of numb me out. And then 2 became 4, 4 became 6. And then we all know how that goes. I ended up in rehab.
Yeah.
So you started drinking a little bit of wine?
I would start with the wine, and eventually it was a box of wine in my closet. Because I didn't want people to know how bad this really was. And so I escalated into that very quickly, where that became my pattern, where it was like I needed something to wake me up because I was drinking so much at night to go to sleep, to deal with the trauma that was going on and everything that was in my life at that point. And this became my coping. And I owned a vintage store at the time. It was quite large, actually. And I started realizing that maybe this is a problem. And, when you first get into this, you start saying, and if you have an ounce of intellect, and of course, the older that you are, and your mom, and, all of this, you're like, I can stop this. I can stop this at any point. You keep thinking, when did this really start becoming a problem? And is it really a problem? I don't think it's really a problem.
So you're on that roller coaster that we know a lot about, where there, you take something to get up in the morning and get you going, and then you need something at the end of the day to kind of help you relax and get down. And pretty soon that window gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, to where you can't, your body habituates, your tolerance goes up. And the things that used to work aren't working, and so your doses are going higher. And a lot of times people have told me they end up taking stuff almost at the same time.
Right.
They're like, instead of it being just the morning and late at night, one to get up, one to get down, by noon they're taking them both because they're just trying to function.
And I'm going to hazard a guess here. I'm going to say that probably became the case with you, where you were drinking and taking Adderall at the same time.
Probably. I mean, at the moment, like I started escalating to realizing, geez, I'm drinking a lot of wine. And then as a woman, you're like, well, that's a lot of calories. So then I was telling you earlier, vodka cleans everything. So I'd clean it with glass and chrome underneath it. And some of my worst episodes that happened, they literally had to break the window down to get me out of my store. I don't remember, because I went in and I started cleaning the table. And I think at that time I was thinking, I'll just take a little swig.
Hold on. You're cleaning things with vodka.
Vodka. Oh, I'm here to tell you, vodka will remove paint.
Okay.
From things.
I didn't know that. I can guess, but I've never actually met somebody who. So you had this vintage store, so you would have had a lot of products that probably need a little touch up, a little shine. Yeah. And so you started off using that. Why didn't you just use a regular cleaning product? Why the vodka?
Someone had told me, and you just buy cheap vodka, and it literally will clean the chrome and make it look brand new,
shiny,
or glass, or any. Okay. Again, That's the progression of what we're talking about, your mentality. Let's be
I was going to say it's kind
drinking.
of addict thinking, right?
Right, exactly.
People say, are you drinking? You go, no, I'm cleaning.
Well, I'm at work here. I'm getting stuff done.
Come on, what are you thinking? No.
So I remember
I just think that's
it.
great because it's cheaper to go to the Smith's and buy some cleaning products than it is to go to truck over to the liquor store and buy a bottle of vodka. But that's how an addict brain sort of justifies behavior.
Two birds, one stone.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so I'd heard about it, and so the only thing I recall was taking that swig. And the next thing I know, I remember vaguely hearing my daughter knocking at my door and thinking, I don't want her to see me like this. At this point, I knew that I was intoxicated, and I hid. I don't remember anything further until the next morning, waking up and looking at a ceiling fan. And I said, God, I got to get back to my store. And my son-in-law at the time said, you need shoes because there's glass everywhere. And they had literally broke my front window because all they could see was this shattered this table shattered in there, and thought that I was bleeding to death inside. So then after something of that nature, you think, oh, I'm for sure done. No. I mean, there was incident after incident where I started realizing that my alcoholism had gotten to a point where I literally I would get in my car and realize I had alcohol between my seats and didn't recall going to the liquor store to buy it.
That's the maddening part about this disease.
I had no idea.
Yeah, you said it so eloquently there that, you thought that would be like, hey, I got to get this in order, but no. Multiple incidents after that.
Multiple. I mean, I was 114. I lived in Arizona. 114 degrees. The only reason I'm alive was my daughter forgot her dance shoes, and they had to drive back, circle back, and I was in the driveway, head down on the concrete at 114.
Wow. And, you mentioned like, oh, you would think that would stop me. But the interesting thing about how our brain works through behavioral reinforcement is this scary thing happened. It was really traumatic, but it all worked out, and so your brain kind of goes, oh, we're okay. And so then the next time you're in a similar situation, your brain kind of goes, this is kind of like that other thing that was kind of lousy, but we were okay with that. We'll probably be okay with this. And so your brain sort of starts to work against itself by saying, we got through that last thing, and we'll get through this next thing, and that therefore it justifies continuing to drink.
In my active addiction, I can go back and tell you about almost every great time I had while drinking. But I'd struggle to find all the times that I messed up. Now in my sobriety, I look back and I can tell you, and I can pinpoint, and I can show you all the times I messed up. And I've had to sit through those, and I've had to come to, to be okay with it.
You have to accept yourself in order to move on.
I can't go back and change it, and I know it happened. But back in my active addiction, I blatantly put that out of my brain. And people could have come up to me and said, remember this? I go, nope, I don't.
Yeah.
Don't remember it, but now I do.
Yeah.
So we're going to find out more about Debbie's story. You're listening to Project Recovery right here on KSL. Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. Our guest today is Debbie Nelson with Maple Mountain Mental Health and Wellness. She's talking about her, ascent or descent. Which one is it?
It depends on your perspective.
Into alcoholism. And you didn't start drinking until you were what age?
38.
Before that, did you ever experiment? Did you ever, in high school? Nothing?
No, so I was the good Mormon girl. And I like to say that that's probably one of the parts that so many people are suffering within the religion, that they'll find something and then it's kind of hidden. They don't want to talk about it. But matter of fact, I think even in early sobriety, it was like, well, I don't want to, I'm not one of those people. And the bottom line is that I started my career or my knowledge of substances or abuse later in life. I would evolve to that to a higher level, just the same as anyone else, if I had started when I was 14 years old. So opposite of you saying, I have all these great memories partying, I associate drinking with dealing to numb the trauma and other issues that were going on in my life. So it was not something I look back on necessarily and say, well, that was great. That was just what...
It was self-medicating.
It was self-medicating. And I think many, many people that have addiction issues will attest to that it's self-medicating, something that's the trauma, self-medicating an imbalance that's going on in their life, and it addresses it so well that that's what they do.
So after multiple incidences of you drinking vodka cleaner,
right.
Listen, that was it. I'm here to tell you.
No, I know. I get it.
I'm telling you.
And you said your son-in-law and your kids, were like, hey, you got to get some shoes on. There's glass everywhere. Does this come to a boiling point, or how long do you try to navigate this road? I
continued to do it when I passed out the last time, and I was at 114 degrees. At that point, my sister, Danette Forward, was in the industry that was up here, and she was like, you need to get help. And at that point, I remember the only thing I could even admit to at that point was saying, I think I called her and I was very hungover and I said, I need help. And that's all I said. So she immediately put this in order. Now, she knew all too well that quickly would be backed out. Immediately I'm thinking, this is nuts.
You almost want to take it back right after it comes out of your mouth.
So my story is also a very spiritual story, because I remember at that point almost blasphemously praying, like, I don't want to hear any little voice in my head that I'm supposed to go somewhere.
I need a big
I want
big sign.
something that is huge. I want you to burn it in the lawn. So I'm out cleaning out my work van that I used to haul things in, because I'm thinking, I don't want people to really know how bad this problem is. Because, most people...
There's a lot of shame around alcoholism, especially, I think, in your case where a person is doing it just primarily as self-medication.
Right.
So there's shame around having problems in the first place, and then there's shame about how a person's dealing with their problems. And, of course, people do all sorts of things to try to hide it.
Right. So I blasphemously said this prayer, said burn it in the lawn, went out and start cleaning out my van with a big trash bag, thinking I don't want my people to find how bad this. And anyone that has addiction issues realizes you find those bottles everywhere. You find the pill bottles everywhere that you've put underneath the seat. You've stored them in
stashed everywhere.
Yeah.
So I literally,
beer tops.
I literally had this trash bag in 114 degree heat, and a man came over that was a neighbor, and I didn't really know him. And he was standing there, and he's sweating, and I'm sweating. I'm looking at him. He says, I don't know whether you know this, but my wife and I, we pray for people in the neighborhood. And I'm thinking, did my mother send you? Because I am not in the best of mood at this point. And he's like, I'm looking, I'm like, okay, well, give me your pamphlet, whatever you're going to do. And he says, I just want you to know, for 3 nights, I've not been able to sleep. Okay? Again, give me your pamphlet. And I just have to deliver a message that he sees you, and he knows you, and he loves you. Now I think I can go to sleep now. And he left. And that was my mess, because at that point, immediately, I was thinking, I don't think I'm going to do this. I'm not going. And I saw that as a very clear directive that I was on the right path, that I really did need to do this. Now, it's not to say that your recovery story, you go places, you still have this part of you, that egocentric part of you that says, I've got this. They don't know what they're talking about. And
They've never met a person like me.
Yeah, they don't know what I am or what I'm doing. And I have story after story. So I challenge anyone I ever talk to or deal with to say, put it to the test. I don't care whether you believe in God, whether you meditate, but if something's right for you, it's going to blight something. You're going to be driven to the people and the places that will help you.
So that very same day that you were praying, this fellow stops
out. Yeah.
Right there out in the lawn.
Yeah,
wow.
So I left.
That's impressive.
I left and then met another person on the plane. All I could think about was that I had business class. I was going to get 2 drinks, so at least I'd be able to drink on my way. Another lady sits beside me, and I've got a hot guy that's in line. I'm thinking, this trip is not going to be bad. Good-looking guy, got 2 drinks. Lady says, looks like Rose from the Titanic. I'm really sorry. I don't drink. Do you want mine? It's even better.
Right, you got 4 now.
Yeah, I have 4 drinks. Like, this is not going to be bad at all. I get there, good-looking guy, and then the little old lady looks like Rose that gave me her drink ticket says, do you mind if I sit next to that young woman instead? Sure. So she sits next to me, and she happens to be an author. in one of her poems, she looks at it, and I'm looking, I saw you're an author, and she's telling about her beautiful marriage, and I've written this book, and I'm going out and I'm getting it published, and I'm like, I don't want to hear this. And proceeds to then show me one of her poems, and it was on regrets and how they mirrored your door. And I thought, God, I guess, so that right then the drink cart comes up. He says, do you want a drink? No, I'm not going to have a drink. And it was like story after story that on this path, I kept saying, what's my next step? What am I missing in this picture? Because I don't want to be this for the rest of my life. So where am I going to need to go? Or what do I need to learn? Or how do I need to heal? Because this has to stop. And you never stop having those doorways open, pathways of experience if you truly want to get better. If you want to get better. But I challenge people all the time, just because that didn't work, there's thousands of modalities and things out there that will work.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get discouraged because someone says, well, I don't believe in 12. I don't like 12. Great. You don't like 12-step? There's many other modalities and other places that are support. There's other things for people. So that was, one of many. I went to Maple Mountain, an extremely ethical business owner, always kept in contact with his people, got sober, but I heard the standard thing because, at the time, Maple Mountain was still new and it was standardized rehab.
What do you mean by standardized rehab?
So I say the business model standardized. Everyone's heard the story or the speech, look to your right, that person's going to be dead more than likely in this room. And look to your left, this person's going to be out. So out of this room in here, there's probably going to be two of you that are going to survive the disease of addiction.
You were told this in rehab?
In rehab, and which is very common.
I had a similar one. When I walked in there, I walked by the same girl for 3 days in a row, and every time I saw her, she'd go, 13. I finally got the guts to go, what do you mean 13? She goes, 13% of us are going to make it. I go, what? And she goes, yeah, that's the statistics. And I was like, oh. I said, well, I want to be one of them. She goes, how do you know? I go, because I get to decide.
Right.
And so, but that's really what the numbers are out there. And I don't even know if they're that high anymore.
I think it's below even 10%. So the business woman in me and just my age, I immediately started thinking there's something wrong with this picture then. Something terribly wrong. Because if we had cancer and someone says you have a less than 10% success rate, how many people give up? Because this is the business model they've been taught, that you have 12-step meetings and you have rehab. Or that's your rehab, and you have counseling and you have medication. I left with a big bag now of medication to manage my, mental health issues, which were evident. Obviously, I was self-medicating. But when I left, I kept saying, what else do I need to know? What else do I need to learn in this whole journey? So I got introduced to energy healing and energy work, which was a huge factor and a huge builder for me. Again, it was a modality that I utilized. But more importantly, when I went to this training to learn it, this gal was sitting beside me, and she kept kind of saying, I don't know why I'm here. This one just doesn't really connect with me. She was very, into all of it. I've learned other. Mm-hmm. And day 2, she looked over at me, and she said, I know why. You're going to work with Julia Ross. She wrote The Mood Cure. You need to go home and read that.
A lady told you this?
She just told me. So I went home, and I read The Mood Cure, and a light bulb went off. And I served on the Alliance for Addiction Solutions. I became trained in amino acid therapy. And it was an absolute life-changing thing for me. Just reading the book alone, The Mood Cure, was huge life changer, because I said, well, if someone had told me this piece. Now, like I said, the trauma was what kicked off kind of all of these other self-medicating factors. And so reading it, I thought, how come there aren't more people that are learning this piece in rehab centers, in addiction recovery? Because the truth is there's pioneers that are in it that have done 30 years of substantial scientific research. Kenneth Blum has written several books that studied the alcoholic brain. And what he learned was that our frontal cortex becomes engaged in addictive behaviors. And that's why you'll see the entire, population of rehab people that are standing outside of an NA or AA meeting, drinking enormous amounts of caffeine, rock stars, eating enormous amounts of sugar, and smoking and vaping. And it's because it's addressing those imbalances that we all have. Now, so my mindset was we are really dealing with an epidemic of mental health issues that spur our addiction. It's all reversed. We're talking about addiction and not talking about the mental health that's spurring why people are reaching for these substances. Mm-hmm. And the difference is really money. I mean, some people, I think Utah in particular, Utah is number one for, prescription drug addiction. They can go to their doctor and get prescription drugs. So, if you have a great insurance policy, you can be in your doctor's office and be a middle-aged lady who is highly addicted to Xanax and other, Adderall and other things that are addressing what's going on in your life, so to speak. But I learned a healthier way and started learning about the microbiome and learning about gut health and nutrition.
And I want to find out more about that, but you said something about your trauma. Now, in your recovery and in your road to sobriety, eventually you have to address that trauma.
You have to.
And you know what I mean? I mean, I think amino acids are a great way, and I think that helps you in your recovery. But if you don't go back and address those traumas that were handled, so you did do that, though.
I did. And that's what I'm saying is I've always said, like Maple Mountain, who I'm with now, the reason I've gone back is their trauma treatment is number one. So rather than, hey, we're going to meet with you once a week so someone comes for 30 days, you're not going to resolve that in 4 meetings, one-on-one. You're barely going to start knowing the counselor that you're working with. They're barely going to know you. They do 3 days a week. They do neurofeedback. They do, multiple modalities of trauma treatment because they realize that if we don't get to root issues. Now, what I say is that mental health is like a big jigsaw puzzle, and everyone's is different. The difference is that you've got this person that's highly skilled to help you with the trauma and this person that's helping you with the biochemical piece. I do think that so many people relapse when they leave traditional therapy or traditional because they're hanging on, still engaging that frontal cortex and addictive things, using enormous amounts of caffeine, using sugar. At that point, if they could have injected a sea sucker, I would have. I mean, I don't know anybody else, but I needed sugar and I needed it bad. And it was really just like, what do I need to do to keep myself well? And these things are, again, just additional tools. But if someone gave me a tool that said, well, guess what? We've done this study, and when we bring on the use of amino acids and balance the brain and use nutrition, your long-term success rates, and we address your trauma goes up to 87%, I'm much more pleased to deliver that message for myself and anyone else who needs help.
What do you think, Dr. Matt?
Sounds good. Well, what you're describing is what we often call wraparound services or care, right. And that is ideal. I mean, it absolutely is ideal. I think that probably the next evolution in mental health services is to figure out how to eliminate the roadblocks and create more access for people to come in and to come in earlier in the process, for people to understand that, when you were at the point of feeling stressed and overwhelmed and traumatized by children and divorce and business and all of those things, that would have been an ideal time. But most people, A, don't have access during that time because
right.
They haven't hit a crisis. And B, we still have a stigma around going in and
Huge
getting
stigma.
mental health. But think about the progress and all the problems that could have been avoided potentially if you had been able to receive wraparound multi-modalities of services at that time in your life. So I think what you're saying is ideal, and it's wonderful that there are more and more centers embracing that. I would just love to see it become a more common thing and move it up to the front instead of in the back when we have problems.
So interesting. When I left, I launched my own podcast, and I did 77 interviews with revolutionary people in the industry. Because I was so on this quest for my own growth, who or where am I going to go to stay in this line?
And we're going to find out what she learned coming up in just a few seconds right here on Project Recovery. Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. Our guest today is Deborah Nelson. What do you go by?
Debbie.
Debbie?
Yep.
And Debbie, she works at Maple Mountain. She's talked about how at 38 she, because of trauma and some other things, got addicted to alcohol and Adderall, and then found herself in recovery. And then the thirst for more knowledge began. You started your own podcast. You said you interviewed over 77 knowledgeable guests on different parts of recovery.
Yeah, people that were, so it was Addiction Recovery Revolution. It was revolutionary people in the industry that were making changes to change the statistics of outcome.
Because we've talked about this, and I'm vocal about it. I'm not a 12-step member, but does the 12-step program work? Yeah, it works for some.
Right.
It doesn't work for all.
Right.
And we need to find different modalities. We need to find and search different things that work because there are so many different ways to get sober.
Right.
And so that sounds like you were on a quest for us, just to find.
Absolutely. It didn't matter whether it was sound healing. It didn't matter whether it was neurofeedback. It didn't matter it was biosound lounges, isochronic tones. Amino acid therapy was just another thing, but it also made sense to me that, obviously my diet was heavily influencing how my mental health was. And if you're influencing your mental health, you're influencing your sobriety. Obviously, if I can't deal with my issues that are going on and stress and anxiety and sleep and everything else, then obviously those other substances sound really good still.
Because they work.
Anyone taking Adderall, and then someone says, well, now we're taking this away from you. I don't think so. You don't want it.
You need a substitute.
You do. And what I realized, though, was that I needed things that were going to build my dopamine receptors, because that's what Adderall does. And when someone has the deficiency, so becoming trained in amino acids, that light bulb went off because they were like, oh, yeah, well, a person that cuts, a person that is a thrill seeker, people that are addicted to opiates, people that are alcoholics, it's endorphin deficiency. How do you deal with endorphin deficiency? There's amino acids that actually, and there's scientific tests. I mean, there's neurochemists that are studying the saliva and urine and literally can come back and say, this neurotransmitter is not working properly. So when you have that information, you all of a sudden say, wow, you mean there's something naturally that I can take that's good for me, that's not going to hurt me, that actually is going to help with my ADD. Now, understand, we all have predispositions for different things. I think sometimes a big part, too, is starting to do that therapeutic process of saying, that's just how my brain works. It's me, okay? I'm okay with that. I know what I'm good at. I know that I'm not so good. And as you get older, you're a little bit better at not camouflaging or feeling inadequate. I don't really care if I'm great at doing bookkeeping. I won't ever be good at it. I don't care if I am good at it. I don't beat myself up, but there's someone that is. So, there's all different aspects of it. But so the amino acid and the neurochemistry piece along with the trauma piece, I felt like the evolution of treatment is now here. Because before, most people used to hear not that long ago that if they didn't employ or go for a 12-step program or readily, that they were doomed. It was kind of like apostatizing from a church. I mean, you're not a part of 12-step, you're going to be dead.
Well, that is something that's been out there. And over 20 years ago when I started graduate school, I remember sitting in a seminar and being told that less than 50% of the people that need AA go to AA. So there's a problem right there. Then after the first meeting of AA, less than 50% of those people ever come back for a second because they didn't feel like it was a good fit. So, and then I think it's, less than 50% of those folks, follow all the way through to the 12 steps. So now we're realizing, wow, we're really only capturing a small percentage, but for the people that it works for,
right,
that's wonderful. And I hopefully people who've listened to our show understand that even though Casey's not a 12-stepper and we present lots of other modalities, we don't have anything against 12 steps.
Right.
But it is a small percentage of folks that really find their recovery through 12 steps. So what else can there be? And nowadays, 20 years later, we have a lot of things available to us. I think the listeners would love to hear, can you walk us through what you would do with a person in amino acid therapy? Like what, could you just kind of give us a brief example of a general case of if somebody came in and wanted to try that, what would that look like?
So there's two different things. Maple Mountain actually has a functional medicine doctor that is phenomenal. And Nicole Zeiner, there's functional medicine tests that can tremendously pinpoint exactly. Now, if you don't have that, I always said I didn't start that way. It was just symptomatically, like I read the mood cure.
So they can run tests up front and they can identify your deficiencies.
And address that down to a science, but also just symptomatically through the mood cure. That's how I started. I didn't have money. And when people say, well, I don't have money, I'll say, well, you have to choose where you find your money, because I did, And I started buying supplements and started training. I went through the training, became a coach with it. And the more that I learned about it, the more it was. So an example that most people will know for an amino acid, for instance, is tryptophan, because it's in turkey. We all know that we get sleepy when we eat Thanksgiving dinner. But what turkey has is an amino acid called tryptophan in it. And when our body gets a dose of tryptophan, it says, I need to make serotonin. It's a precursor to serotonin. So there's nutritional things that we can do, but there's also a supplement. So when we're handing the body the serotonin, when we have enough serotonin, we sleep well. We have good sleep patterns. We're happy. We deal with stress better. When we're depleted of that due to trauma going on in our life, diet, lifestyle, whatever. Drinking obviously is not going to help.
And people should know, the medicine equivalent of that would be like Prozac and the SSRI families of medications. But what you're saying is a person can have that effect more naturally by taking a tryptophan supplement. Right. Is that available?
Well, yeah. And so what happens? Or do you
just have to like turkey a lot?
No, there's supplements. So Maple Mountain has their we've got a neurochemist that came up with protocols that build neurotransmitters and start healing the brain. Because if we start healing the brain, it's miraculous that you can start getting how much more from your therapy. You can feel better. Again, it's not an anti-medication or a fight, because there's medication, there's place for it.
And there's a lot of people that have an aversion to the Prozacs and those of the world. And I can tell you this, and I know we're on KSL radio and all that stuff, but guys didn't want to take it because it messed with their sexual libido.
Yep.
Well, and it does for women, too.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yep.
Guys are just a little more concerned about that usually.
I mean, honestly, I was sitting in the group and they're like, "You're going to do this?" He was like, "I don't want to take it, man, because I don't want to ruin that." I was like, "I'm in rehab, so I'm not really relying on this right now." You know what I mean? But let's see what happens.
Not my number one concern.
Yeah. But I mean, but that is a general concern, and we've had people on here who have said that. You know what I mean? That it numbs them.
Yeah, and it's a small percentage, by the way. It's not a large percentage of people.
Small percentage, but a lot of people
struggle with their libido. And for a lot of those people, it just is an adjustment issue. And after about a month to 2 months, your libido comes back. So for some people, it is a big problem. Certainly, you have to weigh your options sometimes and say, what's the bigger problem? That I'm depressed and suicidal, or that I'm having a hard time with the bedroom?
So, this is another tool that kind of level up, and also a light bulb went off, like nutritional speaking. I changed completely rechanged my thought process as to how much my diet was influencing my mood. I saw things totally different and saw how much sugar actually causes a lot of the problems related to the anxiety, the caffeine, and you see that population, women, it's more so like women especially, you start, you're putting on the weight. You're putting on the weight afterwards. Everyone's gaining weight.
Which is a legitimate emotional concern, because getting to all of a sudden, be overweight and not fitting in your clothing and feeling unattractive definitely makes your mood take a dive in a real way. So you have to be careful of what you're putting in your body. As a person who's new to Utah, I want to know what you think about our biggest addiction problem here, the drive through soda mixer places. What do you think about all these people just down in the 44 ounce?
It's a culture thing. I think when I got here, I've never seen anything. I said I'm in the land of Sodalicious and Cookie Crumble. But I'm telling people right now, if you have an addiction issue, that is your number one trigger. You should be looking at these things as huge triggers. And if you don't want to loan up to the science behind how it affects your brain, sugar is equivalent to cocaine to the brain. So, it's
both
just
sugar
thing.
And caffeine are neurostimulants, and they're cheap ones. They're not these big bang like cocaine. Right. But in many ways, that's worse because of their subtle effects over time. You build up a toxicity in your body.
Right.
And I can tell you, a friend I grew up with was telling me one day he had been up for several days studying for this big college final back in the days of college, and he was driving over to the university to go take his college final, and he thought he was having a heart attack. He kind of pulled over to the side of the road and put the car in park. He had all the symptoms of a heart attack, the sweating and the chest pain and numbness and all of those things. And in the end, he was diagnosed with a caffeine-induced panic disorder.
Right.
But it took the folks in the ER a minute to figure out this wasn't a heart attack because the symptoms were so similar, because he had been up drinking Mountain Dews and Cokes for days at a time. And so I think that it's really damaging what happens to our bodies. But here in the state of Utah, because the culture shifts away from the things like alcohol and cigarettes, but it has shifted towards the sugars and the caffeines.
Yeah, big time. I've never seen, it's huge anywhere, but this culturally, I would say definitely. And anybody that's dealing with addiction issues, if they don't reel that piece in, I see them as...
well, that's almost the joke, right? Like you go to an AA meeting, and it's like people are just shifting addictions. Now it's cigarettes and coffee, and it used to be
sugar.
Alcohol, right? Yeah, donuts, cigarettes,
Sugar,
coffee,
right.
Those are all on the table.
Right.
And I think, to be fair, a lot of AA meetings have tried to do away with that, but the shifting of addictions is a real problem.
Right.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So if people want to find out more information, Debbie, about Maple Mountain and the holistic approach and the neuroscience and the amino acids and all that, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, Maple Mountain, well, number one, you start with a Google because it will bring them to our website that will teach them exactly how and why we're different and what they're doing differently. It is cutting edge. We've brought on neurochemistry, functional medicine testing. We have intense trauma treatment. They have an outstanding trauma treatment program. So it's paired together, but it's an educational piece that when people find it, all of a sudden for the first time, they're like, I didn't know that there was all of this that's available. I didn't know that there was so many things that can help me with my mental health. And we've changed it. We're primary mental health. Maple Mountain is, because we firmly believe it's the mental health that comes first, and the byproduct of mental health is addiction. And that's what's reversed, is that traditional treatment is we have addiction with mental health. No, we have mental health issues with addiction.
So what you're saying is, and I think this would be fantastic, let's say somebody's listening to the show and they've never necessarily considered themselves an addict, that they don't drink alcohol, they don't use prescription drugs inappropriately, etc. But they're listening to this today and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I might have a problem with the drive-through soda mixer places, and I might have a problem with sugar and caffeine. They could come and get some help with you guys?
Well, I don't even know the sugar, but what I'm saying is the mental health, because what we have is a crisis of people on Xanax that don't know where to go. Because they don't consider themselves an addict. They consider themselves medically dependent. And they don't know how to find mental health that's really going to help them get off of that. We have an epidemic of people who are medication resistant. They're on enormous amounts of psychiatric medications. Nothing's helped. So primary mental health is now scaling up and introducing science, where typically in this field it's always been symptomatically diagnosed. And you have this disorder, you have this one, this is your DSM code. But nobody's looking at the science behind what's driving it, or the neurological problems or the psychological problems. So now all of a sudden it's amazing to hear a neurochemist say, well, you actually have a bacterial infection that caused the anxiety, and someone has suffered from it for 20 years taking high doses of Xanax. We have someone in our center who has mold toxicity. Okay, if you have been exposed to mold, you are going to have enormous amounts of anxiety. If you have Lyme disease. So there's many, many other contributing factors. So we have a population of people that are medication dependent, med resistant. And I would say some of these medications, I think Xanax, truthfully, anyone that's on a benzodiazepine, it makes heroin look easy. Because their central nervous system, and that's their only. So if that is your only coping mechanism How do you help a person? Otherwise, it's just we're taking you off the Xanax, and it's just like me going off of Adderall. What do you mean? I have a legitimate issue. How am I going to deal with this now? What do you mean I can't take Adderall? I personally had evolved to a point where it's like, yeah, I don't want to take the high doses. So
wow. She's got a lot of information, a lot of energy, and I am so grateful that she stopped by the show today to talk about all the wonderful things that they're doing at Maple Mountain and through your recovery. So as of today, how long have you been sober?
8 years.
Woo.
Congratulations.
That's amazing. Yep. Way to go. Dr. Matt, any last thoughts?
I love it. I love the idea of making, I guess I would call it a proper diagnosis before we go down the path of treatment. And that means we ought to utilize the science that's available to us. And it makes a lot of sense. And I certainly have met folks that when they've done what you're talking about, it makes all the difference in the world. So I appreciate what you guys do.
And I want to thank everybody for stopping by and letting us into your ears. We do appreciate it. You're listening to Project Recovery, brought to you by our friends at knowyourscript.org. And in case they forgot, Dr. Matt, Project Recovery is what?
You know, it's a KSL podcast.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.